Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening once again. Thank you for joining us for this webinar on safeguarding effectively in partnerships from the Resource and Support Hub. I would like to remind you again with our housekeeping rules. You're on mute with your videos off so that it supports our connection. The chat function is only enabled to panelists to support with technical issues. The rest of the attendees will use the question and answer function to ask questions throughout the presentation and throughout the webinar so that they will be answered at the end of the presentations. So we'll start. I think it's now 35 past the hour, so we'll immediately start with our webinar. About the RSH, just a brief introduction to the RSH, which is the Safeguarding Resource and Support Hub. We at RSH aim to support organizations in the aid sector to strengthen their safeguarding policy and practice against SEAH, which is sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment. We have the Global Hub, in which if you want to reach the Global Hub, you can log into safeguardingsupporthub.org to be able to look through the global tools, the resources, news, and events. If you want to join or to look through the South Sudan Hub, you can find us at southsudan.safeguardingsupporthub.org. We have 3 hubs in Africa, that's in South Sudan, Ethiopia, and Nigeria. We also have in the MENA region and in Asia. So our main focus as the RSH is to support the smaller local organizations that are less resourced in developing countries. And we work through identifying major gaps, trying to fill them in collaboration with other partners and networks. So for today's topic, which is safeguarding effectively in partnerships, we are having 2 panelists, one from the national NGOs, and that's none other than Joseph Moga, who is the education manager for Christian Mission for Development, and also serves as the focal point for safeguarding PC, resource mobilization, and organizational learning. He worked with Save the Children International and Christian Aid, so you can see he has both national and international experience, and also worked with the government of South Sudan. He's mainly interested in policy studies and practice communities. He has so far published 9 academic papers in 7 journals, and is also a short story writer with 3 works in the Kalahari Review. From the international side, we'll have Victoria Pugnali, who is the program manager for the Humanitarian and Livelihoods team, and is a safeguarding champion at the British Embassy, Juba. Through her work, she works closely with UN and NGO partners to deliver effective programming. This work includes ensuring that a focus on safeguarding forms an integral part of partnerships. She is going to offer a donor perspective because she has 4 years experience working with the FCDO, headquarters in London, and with the embassies overseas. So without wasting much time, we'll go straight to our first panelist, who is Joseph Moga. You're welcome, Joseph.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much, Caroline, for the Chris introduction. I'm very much privileged to be here this morning to share experiences and perhaps perspectives from national NGOs in the matter of safeguarding practice. And I'm also very privileged to be part of this panel together with Victoria Pugnali. We'd like to welcome our audience, our colleagues across the board, and just go straight to my presentation. I will set the context in which national NGOs have come to embrace safeguarding. Safeguarding, as we all know, is a humanitarian imperative. It is at the heart of our work as we work to save lives and to build resilience among our communities. And therefore, given the fact that it is part and parcel of work to support vulnerable communities, it has become an imperative. And as we work in collaboration with other actors, that kind of work has brought about partnerships. And therefore, as we talk about safeguarding effectively in partnerships, we are also mindful of the fact that partnerships should also reflect safeguarding, because it's a common good and it's a common tool that we use to protect the people we serve, our staff, and even ourselves from harm by way of deliberate acts or unintended acts. So for national NGOs, there are a number of factors that have contributed to our embrace of safeguarding. Safeguarding was able to gain traction with national NGOs on 3 counts. Number 1, the element of due diligence in establishing partnerships as we work in collaborations with other actors has always carried the element of checking whether partners have a strong basis on safeguarding. So due diligence has been a very important contributor to how national NGOs have come to embrace safeguarding. Number 2, the 2016 Grand Bargain Call on localization has come with a very strong imperative for national actors to be put at the center of humanitarian response. As such, safeguarding should also feature prominently in the capacity of these local actors. Number 3, and perhaps obviously, donors have increasingly placed more demands on us to better promote accountability to affected populations, but also essential accountability to ourselves and to our donors in terms of how we manage our grants, but essentially in terms of how we protect the people we serve from the power we have. Because safeguarding is essentially rotating around the idea of power and keeping power in check. Because aid community has tremendous power in relation to the people they seek to help. So safeguarding is actually about keeping that power in check so that children are safe, adults are safe, and staff members are safe. That is the whole idea. So those 3 factors have contributed to how national NGOs have come to embrace localization. Should we move to the next slide? Well, here I will just highlight the benefits of safeguarding practice to us as national NGOs. Number 1, safeguarding as a practice has helped us to be able to describe what appropriate standards of conduct we should have in terms of how we relate to our beneficiaries, to ourselves as colleagues, but also essentially to our partners and donors. It has given us these appropriate standards of conduct. It has given us measures and ways of reporting, monitoring, and investigating should there be allegations, concerns, or incidents of safeguarding. And for us national NGOs, perhaps what you know safeguarding is primarily about child protection and prevention of sexual and exploitation and abuse. That is essentially safeguarding, but safeguarding also encompasses a whole range of policy issues, from data management to gender policy. All these ones are reinforcing the idea of safeguarding. So for us NGOs in the national arena, it has provided us with the standards of conduct, number 1. Number 2, it has helped us to embark on developing that structure, which will then help us to be able to deliver safeguarding as a practice in our program work, but essentially also at the corporate level where we engage in organizational development. So in other words, we are now better able to be more accountable to affected communities because we know the risks that come with the power we have as we work to support them. This is a key benefit for us. The third benefit, and very much briefly, it has helped us as national NGOs to engage our partners and donors in particular by both working on grant management issues, but also understanding the need to remain very vigilant in the way we relate to the people we support, in the ways we relate to each other as colleagues, in the way we relate to our staff at large. These are the benefits, I think, that have accrued to us as national NGOs. I will move a little faster and just dwell on the challenges. Perhaps this here where I really want us to dwell a little bit longer, because this is where we are grappling with the issues to do with our safeguarding practice across the board. And we come from different backgrounds. Even as we call ourselves national NGOs, we are not homogeneous. We are at very different stages of evolution, and therefore I would normally expect our safeguarding practice to have a range of variations. Therefore, these challenges are important to note. Number one, the pressure for change has produced a slew of safeguarding policies with little internalization. In other words, national NGOs have gone on to embrace safeguarding and have embarked on developing a number of policies, including gender policy, SEAH policy, anti-harassment policy, and other policies to do with staff grievances and dispute resolution. All these policies collectively form a safeguarding package. And because of the pressure for change, we've focused more on making the provisions, but focus less on making sure that the provisions are translated into procedures that can practically be used as we carry out our programs and as we relate to each other. So in other words, the level of internalization has not been that deep. If you talk of how often do we as national NGOs display information about safeguarding in our field locations? How often do we systematically vet our recruitment processes mindful of safeguarding? How often do we engage in risk assessment of our project work as national NGOs from the angle of safeguarding? If you look at those aspects, you will know that the level of internalization has not been that strong. And this is the challenge we have. Number two, which is pretty much related to the first challenge, is that key process descriptions and tools in our policies to do with safeguarding are not clearly captured. For example, if I want to assess the risk of contact with children, if I want to assess the risk of activities with children, do I have the tools? Do I have the right process descriptions? If you're vetting staff to check their backgrounds against suitability for work from the angle of safeguarding, do we have the tools? Do we have the process descriptions in the policies? Or are we only focused on provisions that, well, we'll do prevention, we'll do awareness, we'll do mandatory training, but then the tools are not there, including tools to capture incidents or to report incidents. So in a way, for us as national NGOs, we need to focus on translating the provisions of our safeguarding practice into procedures so that we can tangibly be able to implement safeguarding actions. Number three, national NGOs have a tendency to recruit staff based on very much personal or kinship relationships. This is normal here in this part of the world, and this is also very much part of the process of evolution of national NGOs. They have this paternalistic leadership whereby staff recruitment sometimes takes the form of personal preferences. And in this case, it is going to be difficult for us to actively engage in safeguarding, because how would you then go on to vet a staff member who is being recruited if that person comes from your background or is affiliated to you or is related to you? It becomes a question of conflict of interest, and therefore it compromises our focus on safeguarding practice. And as national NGOs, we need to guard against this, and we need to develop impartiality, because we are humanitarians at the end of the day. This is a challenge for us that we need to really to deal with. Number four, there's a fine line between safeguarding as we know it and what is accepted as normal behavior in our communities. For example, we've had a case of a staff member coming back from the field, and he was asked by his uncle to bring the uncle's son to Juba without any due process involving documentation for that child to be brought to Juba. And I can tell you, owners had to return the child back to the field, and they had to contact CMD to basically trigger an investigation, because this was a major safeguarding concern in the form of a child moving without any clear documentation and without any clear justification for that movement. For our local staff, it was like helping the uncle to get the child to Juba. This is a normal behavior, but the safeguarding practice says no. There has to be due diligence, there has to be a due process and duty of care to make sure that this child is properly accounted for as he moves from one point to another. So there's this fine line between what safeguarding is to us as a practice and the norms we engage with locally. And that clash is something we need to understand, so that this nuance will help us to improve our safeguarding practice. Can we move on to the next slide, please, on challenges? Again, when it comes to safeguarding for national NGOs, you would normally see certain staff members dedicated to be focal points for safeguarding. In real fact, most of these safeguarding focal points are also engaged in other organizational development assignments. And so they are really stretched. They have little time to focus on safeguarding. I appreciate that once you have other organizational assignments coming your way, it sort of enriches your perspective because you're able to create synergies between your safeguarding practice and these other assignments you're assigned to. But the problem is with national NGOs that too few people get to do too much work. And so in the process, if you assign safeguarding to a focal point who is so much engaged in organizational development work, there are high chances that safeguarding practice will not be accorded the right amount of attention that it deserves. Finally, there's no provision in national NGOs to embed safeguarding practice in our project budgets. And this is something that has to do with donors. I'm glad Victoria is here. She will shed more light on this. This is something to do with donor perceptions about what national NGOs really need as opposed to what we know we need. So often when you engage in budget negotiations, the element of embedding safeguarding in a project budget is always ruled out. Somebody strikes it off because it's not crucial for the project success. It's not an essential thing. It's not important for our learning. It's not important for capacity strengthening. And so national NGOs miss the opportunity to embed safeguarding as a practice financially so that they can now have this range of resources to keep on improving their practice. I'm done with the challenges. I want to look at the recommendations. These are the recommendations I'm offering to you as I wind this up. I have this recommended course of action. Number one, I want us as partners, both national NGOs and international NGOs, and the aid community, including donors, we need to focus on interactive partnerships that are more interactive than directives, such that we can engage each other equally and learn from each other without having to go through a lot of dictation in terms of what needs to be done. This is important for us because the stages at which we are evolving are completely different among ourselves as national NGOs, leave alone between national NGOs and international NGOs as a block. So we need to have this clinical partnership whereby we can engage in more interactive conversations to improve our collective safeguarding practice. That is my recommendation number one. Number two, we need to focus capacity strengthening for national NGOs on tools and skills, not really on core beliefs. You know, when it comes to safeguarding practice, we know safeguarding is a core belief. That's why it should inform every aspect of our work, every aspect of our programming, every aspect of our corporate management. But then we need to focus more on tools so that people have the tools they need to be able to implement safeguarding action. So we need to focus on skills, give our field staff the practical skills they need to capture allegations, concerns, and incidents, and to engage in investigation. How many of us as national NGOs have investigation capacity when it comes to safeguarding? Only a few of us. And that is a bit of a challenge. And therefore, as a recommendation, we need to focus our spotlight on tools and skills instead of on provisions and policy statements. Number three, we need to engage our leadership so that there's a buy-in. The senior management buys into the need to embed localization, safeguarding is just as much as we're embedding localization as national NGOs. We also need to expand the capacity of our leaders at the management level so that they're able to execute safeguarding action. And this is important. Number four, we need to engage in safeguarding practice comprehensively, not just looking at SEAH policy, child protection policy, but looking at other reinforcing policies, for example, gender policy. This week, CMD has just drafted its first ever gender policy so that it can better support CMD to be more gender responsive, more gender sensitive in its programming, but essentially in the way it manages its employees. So by having a gender policy, you automatically improve the chance of your SEAH policy you improve the chance of doing better child protection. So you improve the chance of doing better safeguarding. So let's focus on these other policies that sort of provide the environment for safeguarding to be nurtured properly. 4, 5, let us try to create viable safeguarding plans that can be translated into budgets and be costed out such that national NGOs can have access to resources to begin to engage in mandatory training of the staff and to begin to engage in producing documentation that can be displayed in the field. Even with the communities we work with, we need to be able to share basic awareness with them about the policy standards and how they can report concerns to us. And those documents have to be properly prepared such that they capture the language and format which is suitable to all the beneficiaries out there. I think I will stop here. These are the 5 recommendations I would want to share with everybody. Let's move to the next slide. This is my takeaway for you. According to research on organizational impact, the single biggest impact is the strength of an organization's learning culture. As national NGOs, I'm challenging us to really develop a learning culture, because safeguarding is a continuous process. It's not a one-off event. It's not something we do or we tick a box because we want to please donors. They're coming around for a spot check, so we need to have all the documents in place. It's not something we need to shelf as a policy document. This is a living document that we need to engage with daily. Therefore, let's develop a learning culture that will enable us to better improve our safeguarding practice. I stop here, and if you want to reach me, that's my email address there for you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Joseph Moga. So we'll go next to have a donor perspective, donor / INGO perspective from Victoria Pugnali, who is with the FCDO and is also a safeguarding champion at the British Embassy. You're welcome, Victoria.
Thank you so much, and greetings to all, and thank you for joining. It's great to see such a good turnout. I'm very happy to be part of this panel, and thank you, Caroline and the Resource and Support Hub for hosting this event, and Joseph for his really insightful presentation. I think he raises some really important points, particularly about working in partnerships, and that this should be really about interactive and open conversations between partners, and not just a one way. Where we can really learn from each other. And I think this is really also at the core of some of the key messages that I want to share with you today, because I do believe this makes a difference between talking about safeguarding just as a tick box exercise and really thinking about implementing this when we work together as a partnership. So over the course of the next 50 minutes, I'll be taking you through a little bit of a step back in terms of what we mean by safeguarding in the FCDO and the British Embassy, how we take then those policies to put them into practice in our programs. And then I also briefly want to take you through the process of raising allegations and how that is followed up in terms of the process on our end and expectations from partners. So on to the next slide. I won't go into the definitions too much, as I know a lot of you will be familiar with this already, but I wanted to contextualize this a little bit. So in its broadest sense, safeguarding refers to avoiding causing harm to people or the environment. And here we're specifically talking about the prevention and response to sexual exploitation, abuse, and sexual harassment. We know that in aid programs, the relationship that we see between aid providers and recipients are often rooted in unequal power dynamics. And this can lead to increased vulnerabilities to sexual exploitation and abuse if that power is misused. And where our focus lies, and really where we're focusing in on this presentation, is on the organizations and the aid workers within our delivery chain that benefit from our support and may be in a position to abuse that power. And when we talk about victims, we're really talking about beneficiaries of the work that we are directly funding, or employees of the organizations that are delivering that work. Now, we know that safeguarding cases in South Sudan will come up, as unfortunately they do all over the world. And when we talk about zero tolerance, really, we don't mean that we expect there to be 0 cases, actually the opposite. But what we're talking about here is zero tolerance to mismanagement of the information. And what we mean is that we expect partners to take this seriously just as we are. And we want conversations about safeguarding to be part of how we work together on a regular basis. So on to the next slide. How do we actually work with implementing partners to safeguard people in our programs? And this picture here refers to the program cycle that we have in the FCDO, and it refers to the different stages that we go through from inception to closure with our programs. And what I really wanted to show with this slide is that when we talk about safeguarding policies, it's really not just a one-time conversation. Rather, there are different stages in which we might be looking at reviewing those practices and embedding conversations within our partners throughout the program cycle. So I'll go through a selection of these in a little bit more detail in the next slides, but you can see we go from some of the initial tendering and design stages to due diligence assessments, reporting, risk assessments, and then onto evaluations and annual reviews. So yes, please, on to the next slide. I wanted to focus on the due diligence assessment, and some of you, if you're working with us already, might be very familiar with this. And this is one of the most important areas that we look at the start of the design stage before we begin funding agreements with partners. And really, it's about gauging the ability to apply safeguarding in your work. So as you can see here, it consists of a series of questions across 6 main areas. And these are looking at your overall approach and culture and policy on safeguarding, looking at your complaints and whistleblowing mechanism, your recruitment and training, risk management, code of conduct, and governance and accountability. And what I think what might be most helpful for me to highlight here is to take you through some of the questions of what we might be asking at this stage to help you understand what we're looking for. So on to the next slide, I'm going in a little bit more detail on 2 of these. So first of all, recruitment and training. On this one, really what we're looking at is your overall approach to safeguarding in your employment cycle. So what this might look like is, for example, thinking about what background checks you're doing on new employees, what training you're providing to your staff, and what does your HR policy broadly look like. So for example, what type of background checks are you doing on new recruits? And does this differ, for example, depending on whether the role might be more or less beneficiary facing? And as Joseph mentioned in his presentation, a lot of the recruitments as well might be from leaders that might have a paternalistic approach. So having this in mind would be really helpful, as we know that recruiting leaders and staff with a commitment to understanding, having willingness to learn about the importance of safeguarding is really important to contributing to a safer organizational culture. I then also wanted to talk about quickly on the code of conduct. So this looks broadly at sort of the values and the principles that would be applicable to all staff in your code of conduct. And obviously, if you can demonstrate that you have a strong code of conduct, that's fantastic. And then I guess the follow-up question and the more important questions to look at are also, how often do you look at refreshing this? And how do you check that your staff have really understood what it means, what everything means in the code of conduct? How do you check this, and how do you engage with your staff on this? So I wanted to highlight 2 important takeaways from this. One is that those of you that will have done this process will know that these checks are thorough, and it is a long process. Having said that, we don't expect every organization to be completely perfect. And on the contrary, we do really expect there to be gaps and recommendations. We don't come with the expectation that organizations will have already all of these policies perfectly in place. And actually, we would really want to work with you to help to develop a plan for maybe how we may recommend strengthening them and providing that support, and then following up on those regularly. And the second thing is that we would carry out these due diligence assessments with our first tier 1 partners, but the expectation is that the similar steps would also be taken by the downstream partners further down the chain. So this applies to all. In the next slide, I wanted to very quickly show you what a snip of an agreement would look like. So once we decide to proceed with a partner, we would then sign agreements. And you can see here a very quick example of some of the language on safeguarding. This is just to show that we would be embedding sort of expectation and organizational commitments also within our agreements with partners. So moving on to the next stage. Next slide, please. Thank you. So here really we're looking at, as we get into the design stage of a program, now that we've understood what policies and gaps that you may have in place, we would then start thinking about, what safeguarding systems you would build specifically for your program. and how you're translating them into practice. So it might be helpful here to highlight that some of our considerations from our end at this point in time. And really what we're looking for is an understanding from the partner about what some of the challenges may be to actually implementing this safeguarding system in practice. It's one thing having the policies on paper, but we understand that it's much more difficult to actually implement this, as some of the challenges that Joseph also mentioned. And often this is something that we would be looking to hear from you. You know, what are these challenges? Not working on the ground is not something we would be able to give necessarily the best advice on. So we would also be looking for example, how you're making sure that that beneficiaries would actually be able to access a complaint mechanism. How are you consulting with your communities, and how are you making sure that you understand what their needs are and what their approach may be? And we want you to articulate to us what your safeguarding system will look like, but also what your needs may be, and if there are gaps in implementing the tools. And if so, if we need to build these, for example, in the budget lines within the programs, this is something that I speak on behalf of the SCDO. It's something that we very much welcome, and we would work with you on, and we are in fact doing so with many of our programs. And this is also where the supporting hub, the safeguarding hub comes into play, because we're also funding them to exactly give this advice to partners like yourselves in terms of how you can actually apply these policies into practice. And our role here really as the FCDO would be to identify how these mechanisms are actually working. Once we have a system laid out on paper, we would be working with you regularly to have conversations about, you know, how is this actually translating, how is this working? So on to the next slide. Really, we do this by making sure that we are embedding safeguarding into our routine conversations and our routine checks. And every sort of funded program has at least 3 or 4 regular checks per year. So these may be regular monthly catch-up meetings. And again, it goes back to the point I mentioned at the beginning about having open and regular conversations between partners and donors about the reality of how these policies are developing into practice. We would then also follow up with conversations in quarterly reviews, meetings and annual reviews, but also during our third-party monitoring or field visits, where we would want to embed conversations about safeguarding. So into the next slide, please. I wanted to touch on how we actually report cases and what you may need to do. So in terms of when you should start reporting to us, we expect that any credible allegation should be reported immediately, as well as obviously when an incident has already occurred. And by a credible allegation, we mean it's likely to arise when there is essentially sufficient information from your end that would trigger an investigation. And at this point, it should be immediately reported to our central line, which is reportingconcerns@fcdo.gov.uk. Now, because you'd be having at this point regular discussions with your program teams and perhaps a safeguarding champion like myself, it might be the case that you would raise these issues with your team directly first, and then this would be also sent to reporting concerns. And the investigation that would follow this would then determine case by case whether there is actually a credible allegation and whether that was substantiated or not. So on to the next slide. What happens after a report is actually made? From reporting concerns, the case will be picked up and it will be triaged by our safeguarding investigations team. This essentially means they will assign it a priority, and then they will give it to a case manager or someone like myself as a safeguarding champion to take this on. And with our safeguarding investigation team, our role would be to understand what are the terms of reference for this assessment, for example, and how the allegation is being managed. So of course, this will be handled on a case-by-case basis, and we may request to see additional documents such as a redacted copy of the investigation report or of the action plan. And what I also want to emphasize here is, again, that we are here to help and can provide support and capacity to manage that investigation if needed. If if, say, for example, you feel that there are insufficient resources or capacity to deal with that case, that there is certainly a way that we can help and come in and provide guidance and support with that, as we have teams of experts in our investigations units. We would also regularly be in touch at this point to sort of understand how the findings of the assessment have found and what the recommendations are, and how these would then be implemented. And at a later stage, thinking about learning, we would think about looking at, how maybe these recommendations could have changed systems or even approaches within the partner organization, and what support was given to survivors and victims. As the last slide, just to conclude, I wanted to for you to take away. The first is hopefully on an understanding of expectations from the FCDO, including our zero tolerance to inaction, which does not mean zero tolerance to safeguarding. Safeguarding cases, sorry. The second being the importance of collaboration and having open and honest conversations and partnerships, which I believe is really key. Noting that safeguarding should not just be a one-time conversation. We should be looking to embed this really into routine program management checks, and we expect there to be conversations about challenges and risks that you make us aware of, and that's the way that we can also support you. And finally, also, again, a plug to this Safeguarding Resource and Support Hub, which is a fantastic source of information that we are funding for everyone to look at and use when implementing programs. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you so much, Victoria. We have already, this is for those who want to connect with the hub. These are our mediums of communication. We'll go straight to the question and answers. I'll read the questions, and then either of the two, and unless the question is directed to a specific person, but then also another can jump in. And then a request is from one of the attendees. They would probably like to put the name to the face. So I would ask Joseph and Victoria, as you answer, maybe you could also just turn on your video so that these people can also put the face and the name together. So the first question will go to Joseph. Someone specifically mentioned Joseph and said, Joseph, please share your thoughts on budgeting to support safeguarding. Some partners want this covered as part of admin cost, which is so little. How do you negotiate with partners to cover safeguarding as part of core activities?
All right, thank you. Can I come in on this?
Yes, Joseph.
All right, thank you so much for the questions. I think there are two questions out there about this particular issue. It's a related question on financial constraints, basically that national NGOs have the base capacity to promote safeguarding as a practice, but they have financial constraints that can allow them to be able to do so effectively. So my answer to the first question is this. Yes, that is the issue we have with donors when it comes to budgeting for safeguarding as a practice. It's normally relegated to the category of admin activities, and therefore the cost will eventually be reduced such that it doesn't reflect this high overhead costs. That is the problem. What we've done at CMD is to introduce learning as a budget line across our project budgets. And at first we thought this was not possible, but because of our persistence, we've been able to secure in February a budget line of $10,000 to support with organizational learning. And under this subheading of organizational learning, we also mean engaging in issues of policy internalization among staff members. So for national NGOs, a very good way to be able to market the idea of embedding safeguarding in their budgets is to present their projects as projects with an element on staff development, strong capacity building or on a learning plan. You should have a learning plan in organization and use that as a basis now to lobby for funds to promote learning within the organization. That, from my experience, has been one of the easiest ways to be able to negotiate this, such that you have safeguarding embedded in core project activities as opposed to admin costs. That is one I can offer to you immediately. But the second one, that one has to do with the financial constraints, is simply because also as national NGOs, our mindset has not changed much really. We tend to think of practice as a corporate thing in terms of finances. Yeah, it might be true, but in most cases, there are things you can do without effectively looking for funds. If you have a corporate policy very strong on staff development, then there are high chances that the savings you have made over time could also be allocated to support that element of staff development. So as national NGOs, we need to be strong on staff development. We need to have a very strong accent that our staff members should be developed and strengthened. They shouldn't wait for these occasional rounds of training or workshops coming once in a while. They should be systematically and regularly exposed to opportunities to train and learn, even at their own pace. And therefore, we are encouraging, in CMD, we're encouraging process-based learning, personalized learning, where you can go to Kaya online platform and you learn as many content, as much content as you want, based at your own pace, so that you can be able to complete, for example, the essentials of safeguarding. It is a course which is on the Kaya online platform. You can still learn that one without having to look for finances. So we need to develop, in real effect, we need to develop a staff development plan that can help us then to now negotiate for funds or for resources. You can't mobilize resources when you don't have a plan even to develop staff in the first place. And I would want to situate safeguarding within the framework of that staff development. Is that helpful, perhaps? Thank you.
Yeah, yes, I think so. So basically, in short, I would summarize what you said is that NGOs need to be innovative and also persistent, and they need to take care of their staff in terms of personalized training. The next question is saying that national NGOs work with a variety of international partners, and sometimes each partner requires the NGOs to fill in their organizational risk assessment formats on safeguarding. And at the end of the day, it's overwhelming for the NGO to have multiple formats. Is there a way to overcome this? This can also be answered by Victoria.
Thank you, Caroline. I also just briefly wanted to touch on the question before, if that's okay, just as we spoke about the budgets. Oh, sorry, I also put my video.
That's okay. Victoria, please stand on your camera because people were wanting to see you also. Thank you.
Can you see me now? Can you see me now? Okay, good. Yeah, I also just wanted to talk about the budget question, and obviously I can speak on behalf of the FCDO and not every partner, but for us, and as I mentioned in the slide where I talk about how we actually look at safeguarding into practice in our programs and in our systems, we would have, as you can see, specific questions on how are you going to build your safeguarding system into practice? And that would be the stage where we would also expect to hear from partners in terms of whether there are needs and gaps, and whether there is a need to build in a specific line within the budget. And as far as I'm concerned, this is not something that we would ever sort of turn down, as safeguarding is a really important issue for us. So it's not also necessarily about being really creative, but it is about being informed about what your needs are within the organization, but also where you see the gaps and perhaps implementing them within the community, and what support and what additional tools you need. And those are the sections and types of conversations where these things would come up. But certainly as far as our organization is concerned, we've done this with multiple partners in terms of including budgets within them. And the question about risk, and again, we try and make this as streamlined as possible, but there is always going to be a little bit of a difference depending on which partner you work with. Unfortunately, I think I'm not sure that it would be possible to have exactly the same type of format between every program. So for example, with us, we embed our risk management on safeguarding also within the wider risk management of our program. So it would be built already within the framework that you're working on with your donor on that specific project. So if you're finding that it's overwhelming, perhaps it's more about having those frank conversations with your partners and with your program managers to see if it can be, if you can be supported in that or streamlined in that process.
Thank you. Another question is, what strategies need to be adopted to convince partners that safeguarding is not just to please donors and it's an integral aspect of their work? So from this question, I get that some of the NGOs think that safeguarding is only an aspect to please the donors. So how do we convince them that other than thinking that way, they should think of it as an integral aspect of their work?
Shall I come in on this? Victoria? All right, thank you.
Go ahead,
Joseph.
Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you, Victoria. Yeah, just a few remarks on the question raised about the multiple formats for risk assessment. This is inevitable because each and every partner defines risk assessment from the angle of their mandate or perhaps their focus. For example, if you're working in partnership with Save the Children International, you are more likely to have your risk assessment focus on child safeguarding as opposed to a more comprehensive safeguarding thing to do with adults or staff members. So that element of mandate also factors in when you deal with partners. And therefore, the idea is not to feel overwhelmed, but the idea is to be properly and proactively informed such that we're able to relate to all these multiple forms of risk assessment, but in the same time, we maintain a focus that this is all about safeguarding practice. That's an answer, in addition to Victoria's, of course. And then now straight to the question of Rajiv. I think the question was put forward by Rajiv, basically looking for strategies on how best we can convince partners to consider safeguarding as an integral part of their work, as opposed to a box you have to tick to please donors. This is not about donors. This is actually about the people we serve, and therefore it is a core value for us as aid workers, and that should be emphasized. And you can see the connection between this and our code of conduct for sub-members. We emphasize the fact that we are out to save lives and to help communities rebuild and to be resilient. So we are out at the service of life, and therefore the people we work with have multiple vulnerabilities, and we have power because we come in as aid agencies. We have resources, and we have to keep this power in check so that we can protect them even from ourselves as we seek to help them. And therefore this is an integral aspect of what we do as aid workers. And therefore I think the most important thing to put across to partners, particularly so for national NGOs, is to emphasize that this is a core value and therefore a core competence for us as aid workers who seek to save lives every single day. Number one. Number two, I just want to give more remarks in this regard concerning national NGOs' perspective. They would normally think about their evolution in terms of size. But as national NGOs, we need to drop this idea of we are big, we have this geographic spread, we have this thematic focus, we are growing, we can rival international NGOs. It's not about size, it's really about significance. And one of the things about being significant is that we are able to better support vulnerable communities. And safeguarding is at the heart of that. That should be a strategy to promote safeguarding. Thank you.
All right, we'll have two more questions. Okay, Victoria, come in. It's okay.
Sorry, I just wanted to add on that, as I really, I really agree with everything that Joseph said. And really, this is not about it's not about pleasing donors. And exactly as Joseph said, it's everybody's responsibility to talk about safeguarding and making sure they are addressing. Essentially, we're all working to make sure we're addressing the needs of people and victims and vulnerable individuals. So it's not about donors, but it's about showing that you've understood what your community needs are and what you need to make sure you're able to respond to those needs and challenges within the community and the program that you work with. So I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
We have very many interesting questions. We are going to try and answer them. The rest can be written up and we provide answers. So the next one is, someone is saying, what in an environment where there is no safeguarding policy, a colleague confides in me that she's being sexually harassed and wants advice on how to handle it. How should I approach it?
Please come again, Caroline, please.
In an environment where there is no safeguarding policy, a colleague confides in me that she's being sexually harassed and wants advice on how to handle it. How should I approach it?
All right, let me just come in on this. Well, in the absence of a policy with clear provisions on what to do in the event of an allegation, concern, or an actual incident, I would want to believe that at least every single aid agency has a generic staff code of conduct. And that code of conduct really sort of sets the standards for behavior. And one of the behaviors for a typical code of conduct is to dissuade staff members from engaging in harassment or in bullying. And this particular case here is a case of sexual harassment, because a fellow colleague is engaged in harassing or bullying a fellow colleague member sexually. This is something that could be addressed by a generic staff code of conduct, but in the absence of a provision for safeguarding, there should be HR provisions for staff conduct, and that one should be triggered. And I would normally expect the staff to confide, if the perpetrator is not his or her immediate line manager, to confide in the manager, or to confide in the HR manager, so that this can be escalated to senior management without any fear of retribution. The question actually itself signals that there's a sense of fear that there's no any provision made for me to be able to address this issue. What happens to me if I step forward and I make open or public the case that I've been harassed all along? Leadership in the organization and the culture itself of any organization should promote staff transparency and should help the staff to come out with issues they have. And that should be my short answer. And I leave this for Victoria to come in on as well.
Thank you, I agree. The other thing I was going to mention is, obviously it depends whether we're talking about an aid worker that might be within an organization that we support or within our delivery chain. If we are talking about that, then it does very much fall within also our responsibility to raise these allegations if there is a credible allegation to our reporting concerns line and to your projects. So if it is concerning with an organization that we are supporting, then that's certainly the route that I would immediately suggest to go through.
Okay, then
Caroline?
Finally, because we are running out of time, finally, before Noel gives us the poll, what is the risk of whistleblowers' failure to prove their claim, and what can be done to protect a whistleblower where policies are either in place and are not being implemented, or where there are even no policies? So this talks about whistleblowing.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. And let me just come in on this quickly. I think the question came from Vince Coma, if I'm not mistaken. basically, there should be a whistleblower policy as part of the policies an organization develops to cater for safeguarding. In a typical whistleblower policy, there's a provision for the whistleblower to be protected. But then, and here comes the catch, in the event of the allegations or the claims made with malice or with malicious intent, there are chances that an investigation will be launched to uncover whether the whistleblower has intentionally chosen to make the allegation out of malice. But that doesn't discourage whistleblowers from coming forward. Typically, in the investigation process, there should be a provision for cases that are close to be reported back to the parties. Like, for example, the survivor or the party which is considered to be the perpetrator should be duly informed that an investigation has come to an end. And if still there persist feelings about malice, notwithstanding the fact that the whistleblower has in good faith communicated an allegation, but if one of the parties feels strongly that this has been done out of malice, then an investigation should be launched. And the whistleblower policy therefore contains also a provision that makes it clear to the whistleblower that he or she should maintain good faith, or that in the event of malice, informing his or her decision or action, he or she will also be liable to investigation. That should be proportionally made clear to all parties.
And maybe just to add, so when we look at the enhanced due diligence, as I mentioned in my presentation earlier, there is a section on whistleblowing, and really one of the key questions that we ask is, first of all, do you have a whistleblowing policy? And importantly, does this protect the whistleblowers themselves from reprisals? And does it include a clear process for how you would be then dealing with that concern? So it's those two things, making sure that there is a policy in place, that there is a hotline number that is private, and people can feel comfortable using, and is there protection to the whistleblower? And then thirdly, also to highlight that if the allegation raised is then not substantiated, then that whistleblower would not be impacted in any way negatively. So those are the really three important things that I also want to highlight. But Joseph mentioned everything. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much. Unfortunately, we cannot respond to all the questions live, but we promise that we are going to have a write-up. We're going to get all the questions, and then the panelists will be able to go through them and have something written up